Hey everybody, welcome to SFND Fest. You've got a chance to see the really wonderful documentary KCSM 91.1, the Bay Area's jazz station to the world in Town Square. And we're lucky enough to have two of the co-directors here. Welcome Jasmine, welcome Wade. How are you guys doing?
We're
Doing
doing
great,
well.
thank you.
Excited to celebrate the film.
Very much. Maybe a good place to start is, what was the kind of the genesis of inspiration for the film?
It's hard to say who's going to take it away. Okay, I can go. Um, sure. Well, the KCSM, the station, and the College of San Mateo, they were actually actively seeking a production team to tell their story. And so, we connected with them and kind of discussed like how maybe we would position it, just given our documentary experience. And, we were really excited to talk about their story, and we just thought we would love to partner with them on something like this. And so ultimately, that was the genesis of how it started.
Very cool. And were you guys familiar with the station beforehand? And if so, or if not, what were some of the biggest surprises as you started kind of pulling back some of the layers to the story?
Well, I'll jump in. I personally was not very familiar with the station. What I am familiar with is jazz. Growing up, I was actually a musician throughout schooling. And so I think that oftentimes with filmmaking, it's helpful to almost come in with a little bit of an outsider lens. So you're not coming in with all of these preconceptions about the film, so that you can make all these happy discoveries throughout. Because obviously films are made for most likely people who haven't experienced the station either. And so I think that it is an advantage to be able to tell that story with a little bit of a fresher outsider view.
Yeah, and I think for me, I do listen to I wasn't specifically listening to KCSM, but I do listen to publicly funded, non-commercial radio stations, and I think hearing their story really made me think about like how much work goes into supporting a station of that nature, which was really you just really don't think about it sometimes on the other end of the station being a listener. And so it was really eye-opening, to get to see their volunteers, get to see the behind the scenes of what goes on in the station, and then just hear from the hosts, the DJs especially, of like how much goes into just creating a set, for their listeners. Like that was probably the biggest thing for me.
And do you think, you know, in telling a story that's, kind of a by and kind of initially like in kind of an auditory medium, how did that kind of the kind of auditory flair affect the way that you guys kind of pulled together the film, but then also were there any kind of challenges in trying to figure out ways to tell it visually?
That's a great question. I love that one. Um, let's see where to start with that. I think that it obviously we played that up in the editing and the pacing and really had fun with the more musical elements. Um, what I will say too is like listening and watching a film is something we discovered throughout the editing process is very different, and like what music plays well on the radio is not necessarily the same music that plays well underscoring human dialogue and visuals and where you have so much to pay attention to. And so something that we actually had to keep finding ourselves doing was pulling back a little bit into like more of a neutral music, to describe it a little bit, because there is a little bit more to pay attention to than if you're just in your car driving and listening to the radio. And that was, I think, something that was completely unexpected when we set out on the process.
And as you were kind of speaking, some of different hosts and DJs and things, um, were there certain things that they were most kind of excited about trying to kind of explore? Or did they just kind of like the idea of kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit about sharing a little bit of the world that maybe folks don't necessarily get a chance to understand?
Well, I think that members of the station were equally excited to talk about the station itself, but really, like, more so their passion is in the music and the education and history around that, And so I think it was actually that's what people tended to gravitate to toward a little bit more than actually talking about, like, when I come into the office, here's what I do. That's just where their passion lies. And so we really wanted the film to be an extension of that mission, which I think we accomplished, talking a lot about the history and the, diverse voices of jazz. So that's personally what stands out to me there.
And do you think I think both of you mentioned being kind of like connoisseurs or appreciations of non-commercial radio, which I think, many documentary filmmakers are, and many that people that appreciate documentary films, are. What do you think it is that KCSM does that, might be able to be kind of replicated in different ways in different communities that, that they've been able to kind of do so well and maybe differently than others? Or what's the thing that you think has been able to keep it going on during this time?
I mean, I probably the relationships that they've established with their listeners. I feels like they have a very personal connection to a lot of their listeners, who write into them, they speak to them, and stay connected with them. And the hosts, I feel like each of the hosts themselves have, quite a personality that kind of embody the station in a way.
Mm.
So at least that's what I feel like I noticed with many of them. So
I'll just jump in here and mention the largest jazz radio their library in the world. I think there is a little bit of a reverence, kind of a Library of Alexandria respect for the amount of history in the building. And you kind of get the sense of almost this like defenders of jazz with how much history there is at the station. And so I think I don't know if that answers your question, Chris, but I think that's probably what's unique about KCSM and different from other stations out there. I think there is this like respect and reverence for the music and the need to continue to propagate that.
Yeah, list.
them are jazz musicians actually themselves. So I that is actually a differentiator too, that they actually live and breathe that genre, even outside of the station. So
Very nice. And you'd mentioned that the station wanted, it was kind of some of the impetus for wanting to kind of create it. What do you think that they wanted to kind of kind of share back to the community through kind of pulling back the curtain, kind of sharing the story that you captured?
So they did do it. It was done in conjunction with their 60th anniversary of the station being in existence. So, part of it is celebratory of, and as well as just sharing, with their current listeners and future listeners of, where the station is headed and um, really what makes them special. So, not sure if that answers your question. But yeah, I guess that was the impetus behind doing it. But it also that the station does run off a lot of fundraising dollars. And so the more that you really see what goes on in the station, the more important, I feel like listeners feel towards the connection that's created between the station and the public. So
Yeah, well, I think you guys did a great job of kind of weaving together the story. And, for those of us that weren't maybe as familiar with the station before, I think it definitely kind of creates, adds to that relationship, just in the sense of like getting a chance to see the people that are involved. Have you had a chance to share it locally with the station itself, and what was the kind of reaction to some of the folks in the film?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of just excitement about sharing that expertise, and also to Jasmine's point earlier, the artistry of curating a set. I think that oftentimes we think of creativity as like, oh, it's just the musicians who are being creative, when really, when you pull back the curtain a little bit and think about, oh, who put the microphone there to record that session? And then, of course, how does that get curated and distributed to us? Where I think the station has this different type of creativity from the musicians themselves, and that I think really is exciting to be able to share, because there is so much passion for that. So I think that's the kind of key element, is that human thinking versus an algorithm that's going to feed you the same song every hour, and just knowing that like this is out there. There is someone being creative, being mindful, and trying to help, entertain and educate you. I think that's what the station is excited to do.
Very cool. Well, thanks again, Wade. Thanks again, Jasmine. Really excited to have your film as part of SF Indie Fest, and thanks again for sharing it with us.
Well, thank you for having us.
So.